also in the 1990s, it seemed to me that the spirit of Mazalo Bracha was also guiding this small group of specialist banks in how they funded the industry. Back then, what the banks seemed to value more than having a clear picture of their clients' group structure, or their equity base, or their stock value, was simply the quality of their customer relationships. Just like the trade they were funding, in the end, it seemed the banks too were depending ultimately on trust. Well, that world seems like it belongs to a whole different century. And Bob Dylan summed it up well, as he so often does when he sung this song. The times they are a-changing. And times truly have changed for the banks. And Eric didn't really touch on in his presentation some of the issues that banks are now facing. AML compliance, CFT compliance, KYC compliance, risk weighting of assets, Basel II, Basel III compliance, and all the tough conversations that follow between a bank's diamond division and its risk committees and credit committees. This is simply how the world is these days. And it's a world away from the days of the 1990s. The trouble is, even if the times they are a-changing in the world of finance, some businesses in the diamond industry have been turning a deaf ear. And in a world where banks have no option but to demand ever more transparency from their customers, and clearer corporate structures, and ever deeper insights into their customers' financial performance, some diamond businesses still prefer to look back to the carefree days of Mazalo Bracha. Maybe this is because we all work with such a unique and a special product. Perhaps we feel that our businesses can also be unique and stand apart and somehow be different from the rest of the commercial world. I can't even count the number of times I've heard from business leaders in the world of diamonds the idea that diamond businesses are simply different. There almost seems to be a pride in the idea that the normal rules of bookkeeping and management accounting and corporate structuring somehow don't really apply in the world of diamonds because diamonds are different. But let's be very clear. Even though the product is special and is unique, for the diamond business, being different, being unique, is a luxury it can no longer afford, because being different is something that makes the diamond business more and more difficult for its existing financiers to deal with, and because being different is something that makes this an extremely difficult market for new banks to enter with any degree of confidence. That's why De Beers is so strongly committed to doing business only with diamond companies that can show us very clearly that in the transparency of their accounts and in their business structures, they are living by the best practices of corporations in every other commercial sector. So I want to turn away from the past now and away from the world of Mazalo Bracha, and I want to look forward to the near future and to the new rough diamond supply contract De Beers will be entering into with its site holders in March 2015. To qualify for this contract, site holders are having to demonstrate very clearly to De Beers through their financial statements, through their corporate structures, and through very clear transition plans that they are building the financial credentials you'd expect to see in any strong and sustainable international business. I'd like to dwell for a moment now on what these credentials are. Firstly, De Beers is insisting that all the site holders should have an IFRS-compliant group structure. In other words, there must be a clear chain of control and a clear chain of revenues linking the corporate centre to all its global operations. All its global operations. This means there'll be full clarity over all the entities that comprise a site holders group and clarity over the corporate relationships between them. Secondly, we will require every year a consolidated statement of the group's annual financial performance. The consolidation is an important requirement. To produce full consolidated accounts, the group must, by definition, be held together by clear corporate relationships. Thirdly, we require the financial statements to be audited and to be audited by a strong and properly independent auditor that has been assessed and pre-approved by De Beers. De Beers is taking its due diligence on sightholders' auditors very seriously this year, because the next of our requirements, and perhaps the most important of all, is that we will require the sightholders' financial statements to have secured an unqualified opinion from its auditors. Now, let's be clear what that means and what an important step it is. As many of us know, it's been the convention for many years for diamond industry auditors to take management's opinion on the value of the stocks. On this basis, the auditors then give a qualified audit opinion. But for a diamond company, the stock value is often the biggest line item on the balance sheet, and if that's a matter of management opinion, the whole balance sheet becomes a matter of management opinion, and the auditor's opinion becomes worthless. And in the modern world, that just isn't good enough. By asking sightholders for an unqualified audit opinion, effectively, De Beers is asking them all to ensure that they have consistent, transparent and complete processes to support their bookkeeping, their stock control, their invoicing and their financing, with sufficient checks and controls to give a strong and independent auditor the comfort to give an unqualified audit opinion. Finally, we want there to be real substance on the sightholders' balance sheets in the form of a minimum value of genuine invested balance sheet equity in proportion to the total debts. Perhaps this is the most fundamental point of all. We want De Beers sightholders all to have sufficient resources invested in their businesses to ensure they have the financial muscle to withstand the highs and the lows of the whole economic cycle. We want them to be financially robust, long-term partners for De Beers and also for their bankers. So what we want to create in the eyes of the world is an instant association between the word sightholder and a whole raft of positive associations. A group structure that's fully corporate and fully transparent, business ethics that are beyond reproach, management accounting that's worthy of a multi-hundred-million-dollar business, tangible financial strength that's there, visible, on the group's consolidated balance sheet, reputable third parties overseeing full compliance, and when we wrap all of that together with the long-term offer of scale supply De Beers can provide, we think that will add up to one critical word: bankability. We can call that a new normal for sightholders. And if you stop for a moment and think how much of the global diamond business flows through the hands of the sightholders, this represents a step change not just for De Beers and its customers, but for the entire industry. Let's be very clear. No diamond business has a divine right to funding, but every diamond business that can show a normal structure and normal business practices and normal transparency has the same right to funding as any other business in any other sector, and that is the new normal for the diamond industry. To leave in the past the idea it can somehow play by different rules and to compete for funding on a level playing field with the rest of the corporate world. Now for me this is a tremendously exciting prospect. Over the last few weeks I've been speaking face-to-face with financiers in New York, in Gaborone, in Tel Aviv, in Antwerp and this week in Dubai. They're all hugely encouraged by the steps De Beers is taking. For the banks already involved in funding the industry, it opens up possibilities of offering new and more sophisticated funding vehicles to diamond businesses that have the right credentials. And for banks with no current exposure, these measures are clearing the way for them to consider gems and jewellery as a sector that's as straightforward to fund as any other business. Likewise for private banks, private equity investors, factoring companies and the bond markets, the message is getting out there that the diamond industry is opening for business as a safe home for their investment. So for individual diamond companies that are only just starting on the path towards corporatization and transparency, I think it's clear that at the end of that path lies the opportunity to access a whole new world of finance. Now, I started this talk by showing you one of my heroes, Bob Dylan, and I'd like to end it by showing you another, the cultural theorist Slavoj Žižek. Now, Žižek is interested in ideology, which to you and me simply means the way things are. And his theory is that for things to change, and he calls that revolution, but for things to change, reasonable people only need to make reasonable demands that within the current ideology are impossible. Now, I've talked to many CEOs and CFOs in the diamond industry this year who've told me that De Beers requirements for the diamond business to have a normal structure, and normal business practices, and normal transparency are impossible. So we should not underestimate the difficulties. We recognise that for some businesses, the changes they will now be implementing will require time and effort and commitment. But in the modern world, for the diamond industry to retain its right to be funded, it must abide by the same rules as every other business sector. It must be corporate, it must be accountable, and it must be transparent. There is no option. Without change, the liquidity pressure the industry is currently feeling will only grow more and more severe. But as the change takes hold, and it's a change that more and more site holders are now completing, I'm very confident that progressive diamond businesses will find ever more funding opportunities opening up for them. To capitalise fully on these opportunities, the wider industry still has a lot of work to do. But if it's to secure access to the oxygen of funding, that's a deal to which forward-thinking diamond companies the world over are now saying, Mazalu Bracha. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.
Tonight, they have offered an option, correct me if I'm wrong, Howard, an option of a roadmap. They give some time, not much time, but give some time to get the act together. And Howard, this industry will get its act together, don't worry. Like in every...
Mr. Vipul Shah, the President of GJEPC, the other office bearers, the distinguished panelists today, ladies and gentlemen. It's a matter of great pleasure for India that the World Diamond Conference is taking place in India. All of us know the importance of India in the diamond industry, in the diamond polishing and cutting industry. But what is a matter of pleasant coincidence is that the conference was started on a day when the entire world community, the United Nations, acknowledged the contribution of India also in the field of yoga. And yesterday, the United Nations announced that June 21st will be celebrated as an International Day of Yoga. Incidentally, I hope all of you know what is the meaning of yoga. In Sanskrit, the definition of yoga is Yujyate Anena iti yogaha, which means something which joins together is yoga. So any conference of this kind, it is an opportunity for joining people together. So it was a pleasant coincidence that this conference and the announcement in United Nations came together. Well, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I must tell you that I am here only to speak about the financing of this industry, not about any other thing. We are conscious of the fact in the government and among the bankers that this industry has a large contribution to make when it comes to generating employment in India. And that's what we need most now. As you are aware, we are really on a high growth path. But simultaneously with GDP growth rate, we are also looking at employment growth rate. And that's where the importance of this industry for us is there. But looking to the industry trend, it's a matter of concern for us that the export of gem and jewelry sector had a negative growth rate last year, 2013-14. Now, we also understand that this is one industry which is highly dependent on high value imports of rough diamond. As also it requires a huge working capital for funding. But also, what is the thing of most concern for us is that the credit by scheduled commercial banks to this industry in India, in all other sectors, it has gone up by 10.19% in 1 year period, which is ending on September 2014. The credit growth in other sectors was 10.19%. While in case of the gem and jewelry sector, the corresponding increase was only 1.2%. Now that's a matter of concern for us. We are looking at the reasons for this. Of course, one of the reasons for this low credit growth is the growing percentage of gross non-performing asset in this industry, gross NPA as we call it. While the gross NPA of all the scheduled commercial banks in India for the period ending September 2014 is 4.56%, the gross NPA of gem and jewelry sector is 10.70%. During the same period. This is, I'm talking about the latest figure up to September 2014. In case of public sector banks, the result is more worrying. The NPA, gross NPA of public sector bank in this sector has risen from 5.3% in 2012-13 to 14.1% in 2013-14. So there has been a sudden shoot. Now, let's analyze the reason for this. Why did this happen? Ladies and gentlemen, this is one industry where trust is the basic foundation of working between trade and financial institutions, as other speakers have also pointed out. This trusting relationship was going strong for the last 5 decades. Diamond being a unique product in terms of its characteristics and also in terms of its valuation, has strongly enjoyed the trustworthy relationship between the industry and bankers. However, last few years has witnessed some shake-up in this ingredient of trust that is core to any relationship. Recently, bank default done by certain fly-by-night operators in the industry has put a dent on this trustworthy relationship. Currently, the collective challenge is to uphold the missing trust to ensure the reduction of NPAs. Our Export Credit Guarantee Corporation too has taken certain required steps. Industry, while handling both exchange and commodity risk, needs to build that lost trust factor with the bankers. We understand that due to the recent events, the banks have made risk management programs a little tighter, but I hope this would soon taper off as soon as the trust is rebuilt between the industry and the bankers. There has been some movement, some kind of a defreezing done in the recent past by the Export Promotion Council. They have taken a number of initiatives. We had 2 annual banking summits apart from other initiatives to break the ice. And we are very hopeful and optimistic that this kind of a defreezing will take place very soon. It is extremely heartening to witness that a strong relationship between the bankers and the industry is now being rebuilt, it is being regained, and the perception of this sensitive industry is again now changing positively. Now to my banker friends who are here, I would like to say a few things. One is that we know that 70% of the cut and polished diamond in terms of value is being polished in India, but in terms of finance, only 40% of international finance is available, and that's where the bankers have got a golden opportunity. They can chip in, they can look at this figure as an opportunity to make some good business, and which is what they should do. So they should not be necessarily influenced by the stray incidents in the past. But if the companies have got processes in place, particularly the transparent mechanisms and audit mechanisms and good valuation practices, I think the bankers should look at this as a big opportunity and should go ahead and give credit to the gem and jewelry industry. Let me assure you again that on our part in the government, we are committed to support this industry as much as we can do with the help of our commercial banks and with the help of our public sector banks, and that commitment remains. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for giving me this opportunity.
Mr. Secretary.
Please don't go away. In the financing of the diamond industry. So thank you so much for that. I'd now like to call on Anup Mehta and Vipul Shah to show their appreciation to Mr. Adir. And thank you so much for sparing the time. I know you've got a very busy schedule, particularly with what's been going on in geopolitical terms with Mr. Putin's visit. Thank you.
It's now my pleasure to
remaining part of the conference in the discussion. But coming to a more important point which I would be talking about, it is really, a lot of them have talked about we want to bring in transparency. The question is, what do we do or how do we bring in that transparency? And this project, which is being launched by, or will be launched by the Gem and Jewelry Council, and of course with all the bourses and the WFDB, is to bring in that transparency into our industry. The question really is, how do you bring in transparency while at the same time helping reduce the transaction costs in the industry? And if you put that question in that fashion, we will come to the conclusion by the end of this discussion. So going forward, the industry has been designated, by the FATF calls the diamond and the gem and jewelry industry a designated non-financial business or profession. What it means in simple terms is you need to do due diligence in all your transactions. You do that today. It's covered through all different guidelines by different countries, which have set their own standards, and it applies to all members of the